Riley didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She just stood up and walked toward the cockpit like she belonged there, while everyone else froze in panic. The quiet woman in seat 18A had gone unnoticed the entire flight, until the captain collapsed and the plane spiraled into uncertainty. Who was she, and how did she know exactly what to do when everything started to fall apart? This is the story of Calm in the Eye of Chaos, and the stranger no one expected to save them. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story takes courage to a whole new altitude. Riley Ferguson didn't make eye contact when she boarded Flight 739. She didn't smile. She didn't pause in the aisle like most passengers who hesitate while searching overhead bins. She moved with the kind of quiet purpose that makes airline staff glance up, assess quickly, and then forget. She wore a black windbreaker zipped up to the collar, faded jeans and boots that had once been regulation military, but were now just scuffed leather reminders of something long past. Her hair was pulled into a low ponytail, not for fashion but function. No earrings, no makeup, no jewelry, except for a simple pair of dog tags that disappeared beneath her collar before anyone noticed. Seat 18A, window seat. No one beside her. She settled in without a word. 2 rows behind, Sarah Bolton, lead flight attendant with a sharp tongue and a sharper eye, nudged her elbow into the galley wall and whispered, 18A, corner pocket. What's your read? Mark Jensen, prepping the snack tray, gave a half shrug. Quiet. Didn't even ask for a boarding wipe. She looks like she's heading to a funeral. Lisa Carter chimed in, folding napkins a little too neatly. She was new and still had the habit of noticing every passenger, a trait she hadn't learned to mute yet. Could be, Sarah replied. Or a convention. Or maybe she's just one of those don't talk to me people. Headphones, dark clothes, don't make a sound. Veteran, maybe? Mark added, glancing down the aisle toward the woman. Those boots, and the way she scanned the exits as she sat, not casual. Lisa frowned. You think? I know, he said, then lowered his voice. Used to do the same thing when my cousin got back from Fallujah. Sat with his back to the wall in every restaurant for a year. Sarah glanced again at Riley, but the woman was already still, eyes closed, noise-canceling headphones. She might have been asleep. Or just pretending to be. Either way, the conversation drifted on. There were carts to prep, announcements to make, and Sarah had 5 more hours to kill before a layover in Brookridge. Row 18 was near the wing. Engine vibrations thrummed through the fuselage, giving a faint pulse to the aluminum around her. Riley didn't mind. She liked being near the emergency exits. She liked knowing where the escape hatches were. It wasn't a habit, it was muscle memory. Like checking the wind before opening a hatch, or double confirming flaps before takeoff. But that life was gone now. Buried under papers, evaluations, and an honorable discharge that came with more silence than ceremony. She kept her eyes shut, not asleep, but in a place that resembled it. Thinking, listening, above all feeling the weight of peace, or something like it, for however long it lasted. The man in 18B tried talking to her during taxiing, one of those business types, cheap suit, expensive watch. He asked if she was heading home or away from it. She gave a slight shake of her head and turned to the window. He didn't try again. 2 hours into the flight, beverage carts rolled through the aisle. She declined everything except a cup of water. No eye contact, just a faint nod. From the rear galley, Mark raised an eyebrow. Told you, ghost mode. Sarah chuckled. You think she's just rude or broken? Doesn't matter, Lisa said, trying to sound wise. Everyone's running from something. Riley didn't hear them, but even if she had, it wouldn't have mattered. People made up stories when they didn't understand something. It gave them comfort, the illusion of insight. Flight 739 was just another connection between cities, Mesa to Brookridge. Light turbulence, mostly clear skies, half-filled cabin. Riley had picked the flight because it was unremarkable. She liked unremarkable. Predictable was better than chaos. Routine was safer than memory. Except memory didn't play by rules. From behind her eyelids, she still saw things sometimes. A pale desert horizon through a cracked windshield. Smoke rising from a runway that should have been secure. Radio static, screams muffled by the hum of rotors. And always the moment. That moment, when she had to make a decision no one else would. The seatbelt sign dinged overhead, a chime like any other, but it pulled her from the swirl of her own thoughts. The captain's voice came on, deep and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into Brookridge in just under 20 minutes. Weather conditions are clear. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and tray tables are stowed." It was a normal announcement, almost boring, until the end of it. His final sentence cracked, not emotionally, but physically, like someone's mouth going dry mid-sentence. "We'll be on the ground shortly." The sound fizzled, followed by a clunk. Silence. In the galley, Sarah straightened up. "Did he just—" Mark leaned toward the phone. "That didn't sound right." Lisa looked pale. "Should we check the cockpit?" The silence on the intercom stretched, long and unnatural. Riley opened her eyes. She didn't move yet, just opened them, focused. A low murmur began spreading through the rows ahead. People shifted, looked at each other. A few turned back to glance toward the rear lavatory, unsure what they'd just heard. The businessman in 18B lifted his head, confused. "That was weird," he muttered. Then it happened. The cockpit door creaked, then banged. Flight attendants began to whisper across the intercom, trying to keep things under control without sparking panic. One tried the cockpit phone. No answer. A minute later, Sarah rushed down the aisle and slipped behind the curtain toward the cockpit. Mark followed a few steps behind. Passengers were talking now. Audible tension humming through the cabin like an electric current. Lisa's voice came over the PA, too bright, too cheerful. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay in communication with the flight deck, but please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll have an update for you shortly." That sentence, "we'll have an update for you shortly," was what made Riley finally sit up straight. She pulled off her headphones and looked down the aisle. Sarah reemerged. Her face was white. Mark was behind her, his hand still holding the edge of the door. The co-pilot, Amanda Price, was calling out across the galley. Her voice was too loud, too fast. He just dropped. 1 second he was talking, and then he just collapsed. I tried. He's breathing, but he's not responsive. He's not. I don't know what to. Sarah held her arm. "Amanda, you're in command now." Amanda's eyes were wide, terrified. She shook her head. I haven't landed solo, not on this route. Not with weather reports like this. And damn it, there's something wrong with the yaw trim. It was flagged during pre-flight, but he said it would hold. Riley unbuckled her seatbelt, and she stood. The aisle buzzed with murmurs and shifting bodies. People noticed now, a passenger standing when they weren't supposed to. Something was happening. She didn't look around, didn't speak, didn't wait for permission. Riley Ferguson, seat 18A, started walking forward, slow, steady, like she was walking into a room she'd been in 100 times before. The passengers watched her go, a ripple of confusion in her wake. In the rear galley, Lisa blinked. "Where's she going?" Sarah didn't answer, because she recognized it now. The way Riley walked. Not fast, not slow, not unsure. With intent. Riley stopped just short of the cockpit door. Amanda looked up at her, breath short and posture coiled like a spring. "Who?" she began. Riley reached slowly into her collar and pulled the dog tags out just enough for the name to gleam. "Captain Riley Ferguson," she said, her voice low, steady, and without even a flicker of doubt. "United States Air Force, step aside." Amanda stared at her for a breath, then nodded, just once, and the quiet girl from seat 18A stepped into the cockpit. The cockpit smelled like coffee, sweat, and something faintly metallic. Not blood, Riley had known that smell too well, but the tinny scent of recycled air thickening under pressure. Captain Tom Ellison slumped sideways in his seat, mouth still crackling with ambient ATC chatter. His right hand dangled, limp, over the center console. The yoke tilted slightly under the weight of his arm. Amanda stood in the narrow space, still half blocking the entrance. Her face was flushed, lips parted like she was still trying to decide whether to speak or cry. Riley leaned over, 2 fingers already at the captain's carotid artery, a pulse, thready but there. Her other hand moved to the headset. "Tell me what happened," Riley said, her voice clipped but calm. He was fine. Said he felt lightheaded about 40 minutes ago, but he waved it off." Amanda took a breath, visibly fighting to rein in her panic. Then during the descent call, he just stopped talking, slurred a few words, and then dropped. "Did he take anything? Medication, caffeine, anything out of the ordinary?" "I don't know, he drank coffee, said something about being tired this morning." Riley reached up and pulled the headset gently from the captain's head. "We need him secure. Seatbelt on, recline him, clear the yoke." She leaned in, took control of the yoke with her left hand, steadying it. Amanda blinked at her. "Move," Riley said, not unkindly, but with a firmness that didn't invite questions. Amanda moved. Together they adjusted the captain's seat, reclined it slightly, fastened the belt, and shifted his legs away from the rudder pedals. Riley worked quickly, fluidly, checking instruments with one eye, scanning altitude, speed, airspeed indicators, vertical speed. The plane was stable. Autopilot holding, but they were descending, and not for long. "Where's that seathar?" Riley asked. Amanda fumbled with the headset, then clicked back into the active channel. "Brookridge approach. This is Flight 739. We have a medical emergency in the cockpit. Captain Ellison is unresponsive. First Officer Price requesting immediate clearance for expedited landing." A pause. Then, "Flight 739, confirm you are declaring an emergency." Amanda hesitated. Riley reached across and hit the mic. "Brookridge approach. This is Captain Riley Ferguson, former USAF. I am assuming command of Flight 739. We are declaring a medical emergency. Captain Ellison is incapacitated. Request immediate priority vectors to Brookridge." There was another pause, this one longer. Then, "Flight 739, roger. Emergency services will be standing by. Turn heading 210. Descend to 8,000 feet. You are cleared direct to Brookridge." Riley exhaled, short and quiet. Her hands moved over the panel, switching from autopilot to manual on the primary access controls. Amanda's mouth opened again. "Wait, you were military." "Flight lead," Riley answered, adjusting the throttle gently. "Multiple deployments, fixed-wing command. IFR qualified, retired." Amanda swallowed, blinking hard. "Why didn't you tell anyone before?" "I wasn't needed before." Behind them, in the narrow galley outside the cockpit, Sarah stood frozen, her hand still clutching the edge of the doorframe. She'd heard it all. Lisa hovered behind her, eyes wide. "She's flying the plane?" Sarah turned slowly, ushering Lisa back. "We don't crowd the cockpit. Let them work." "But who is she?" "A godsend," Sarah whispered and pulled the curtain shut. The cabin buzzed louder now, a rising swell of tension. Passengers were murmuring openly. The man from 18B stood up, looking down the aisle as if he might see something more than a row of identical heads and overhead bins. Parents hushed their kids. Couples leaned in together. Every whisper felt louder than it should have. Inside the cockpit, Riley's fingers moved like she was back in her element. Not in a civilian aircraft, not at 31,000 feet, not in a sky full of pressure and protocol, but back in the seat that always made sense. "Yaw trim's sloppy," she noted aloud, hand adjusting. "Feels like it's drifting left when idle." Amanda nodded. "It was flagged on the last leg. Maintenance signed off, but it's been twitchy. Tom was compensating manually." "Not anymore," Riley said, fine-tuning the trim. The radio crackled again. "Flight 739, confirmed current, pilot in command." Amanda glanced at Riley, who nodded. "Affirmative," Amanda said. "Captain Riley Ferguson, acting P.I." "Understood. Continue descent. You are cleared to runway 2, 8 left. Winds calm. Emergency crews are on standby." They were coming in hot, too fast for a textbook glide, not fast enough to burn fuel. The descent had started late, and the approach was tighter than Riley liked. "Speed brakes on?" "Hurried." "Good. Prep flaps for sequence on my call. You good with comms?" Amanda nodded quickly. Yes, I've got it. You're going to do the landing checklist with me. No autopilot from here on. I need your hands on every step." Amanda's eyes locked on hers, and for the first time since Riley stepped in, there was clarity behind them. "Copy." "Good." They flew. Every minute in the cockpit stretched, heavy with urgency but steady under Riley's control. Outside, the sun had dipped far enough to cast a golden haze across the tops of clouds. The cabin remained sealed in that strange liminal stillness where people either trust or panic. So far, trust was holding. Riley's voice cut through the cockpit again. "Let's talk contingency. If I lose control, you take over. You watch, pitch, bank, thrust. Don't second guess. You trust the instruments. You got that?" Amanda nodded. "And if we lose hydraulic sync?" "We switch to manual override and call tower immediately. I know the drill." "Good." Amanda paused, then added quieter. "It's just been a while since I had to actually do it." Riley didn't respond right away. Her eyes were on the distance now, scanning the faint curvature of the earth, waiting for the first glimpse of runway lights. And softly, "You're doing it now." Amanda blinked quickly, once, then turned back to her checklist. 10 rows back, Sarah made another pass through the cabin, smiling gently, making up answers for questions no one had spoken aloud. The first whispers of, "Is everything okay?" and "Should we be worried?" trickled into her ears like water through a leak. "Just a minor situation," she said with practiced ease. "Captain's a bit under the weather, but we've got someone handling it." "Someone?" a woman in 10D asked. "Qualified," Sarah said, then smiled. "And calm." The woman nodded, not reassured, but at least willing to pretend. In 18A, Riley's empty seat remained untouched. Her headphones lay coiled on the armrest like a shed skin. The man next to her stared at the space she'd occupied for most of the flight. There was no trace of the woman who had sat there silently for hours, just a pair of dog tags swinging gently from the hook of her seatback pocket. The plane banked left. Amanda called it out. "Final turn. Gear down in 30 seconds. "Wait for my mark," Riley said. "Trim still sticky. We'll glide into alignment before dropping." The radio buzzed again. "Flight 739. Confirm visual on runway 2, 8 left." Riley responded. "Runway in sight. Aligning now." Brookridge Airport glimmered through the haze, long lines of runway lighting stretching across the flatlands. Emergency vehicles lined the tarmac like glowing ants, spaced and waiting. Amanda glanced sideways. "You think they know what's happening back there?" "They know something's happening," Riley said, "and that's enough for now." Amanda looked at her a beat longer. "You're not just a veteran, are you?" Riley didn't take her eyes off the horizon. "I was a commander," she said, her voice steady. "But titles don't fly planes. People do." Then she reached forward and eased the throttle down. "But let's bring them home." No one remembered her boarding. No one remembered her name. But now, every passenger on Flight 739 would remember the woman from seat 18A, the one who stood up when the sky began to tilt, the one who walked into the cockpit without hesitation. And as Riley Ferguson sat at the controls, every second that ticked forward was a step into a past she had long sealed shut. Her hands moved across the throttle and control panel with a precision that belied the years since her last active flight. Muscle memory hadn't rusted. It had simply slept, and now it awakened like an old friend. She adjusted the flap settings manually, monitoring the plane's response as Amanda called out altitude and airspeed. Descending through 7,200. Winds variable 7 knots, minor cross. Riley nodded. "Copy. Hold current pitch. Keep our descent shallow for another 90 seconds. I want more room to correct for trim drift." Amanda didn't argue. She no longer looked like someone unsure of her place. In this moment, she was Riley's co-pilot, and that was enough. Back in the cabin, the whispers had faded into silence. People stopped asking questions. They were watching now. Not the screens, not their phones. Those were forgotten. They watched the aisle, watched the curtain at the front of the plane, as if waiting for it to open like a stage to reveal whether the show would end in triumph or disaster. Sarah made a quiet lap through the cabin, collecting the last of the drink service debris that no one was drinking from anymore. She knelt next to a child who was holding his mother's hand a little too tightly and whispered something soft that made him smile faintly. It was a lie, she knew, but a necessary one. At the back of the plane, Lisa peeked between seats, eyes scanning for signs of distress among passengers. She spotted an elderly man in 22F, gripping the armrest until his knuckles went white. She crouched beside him. "It's going to be okay, sir." His jaw flexed. "I saw her. That woman. She didn't even blink when she went up there." "She knows what she's doing," Lisa said. He nodded, but didn't release the armrest. Inside the cockpit, Riley took a breath. She hadn't touched a flight yoke since the day she walked away from her commission. Not even simulators. She'd spent years avoiding them. But now, this seat felt more like home than anything else had since leaving. 10 years, she muttered. More to herself than to Amanda. Amanda glanced over. "Since what?" "Since the last time I landed anything heavier than a 4-seater. Amanda opened her mouth to respond, but Riley cut in before she could offer reassurance. "But I remember," Riley said. "I remember it all." Brookridge approach came over the radio again. "Flight 739, confirm readiness for final approach." Riley picked up the mic. "Affirmative, 3 minutes out. Request emergency priority clearance to land. Medical personnel needed on arrival for unconscious pilot. Aircraft control currently stable." "Copy that, 739. Cleared straight in. Runway 28 left. Emergency personnel are en route and standing by." She placed the mic back in its cradle and looked ahead. "Gear down." Amanda moved quickly. "Gear down. 3 green confirmed. Flaps 20. Flaps 20 set." Outside the window, the golden hour bathed the horizon in soft light, masking the tension that surged through every rivet of the aircraft. Riley could feel the weight of it, not the plane, but the people. Dozens of lives behind her. None of them knew her, but all of them depended on her. Amanda was watching her again. "What is it?" Riley asked without looking away from the horizon. "You were a commander, right? Why'd you stop flying?" Riley kept her eyes forward. "Because sometimes, when you survive something, flying doesn't feel like freedom anymore." Amanda didn't ask again. Altitude ticked down. The glide slope was holding, but the turbulence below 5,000 feet began to flirt with the edges of control. Nothing severe, but enough that Amanda glanced nervously at the trim indicators. Still drifting left. "I feel it," Riley replied, adjusting trim slightly. "Might need to flare later than usual to compensate. You watch my pitch. If I dip below 3 degrees on final, say it loud." "Copy." "Can you?" Fuel. "Level, balanced, both tanks green." "Good. We're taking her down clean." Amanda nodded again, voice steadier than before. "It's strange. But is you being here. Just here, at the right moment." Riley's lips curved slightly. "It's only strange if you think I had a choice." The tower crackled back in. "Flight 739, you are 2 miles from runway threshold. Wind now at 5 knots, quartering tail. Cleared to land." "Clear to land," Riley repeated. "Mark, you're up." Amanda announced final descent over the PA system, her voice strong, controlled. If passengers were listening, truly listening, they might have caught the change, the subtle shift from fear to focus. Sarah braced in the front galley, feet planted, arms crossed tightly against her chest. Her eyes were closed. Not in prayer. Sarah didn't pray, but in concentration. She was trying to memorize every sound, every shift in engine pitch, every subtle vibration in the fuselage, trying to convince herself she'd know if something was wrong. Back in 18B, the businessman who had tried to chat with Riley earlier now sat silent, eyes on the seat she left behind, still buckled, still empty. His hand hovered over the armrest as if considering touching her headphones, but he stopped himself. He looked out the window. The ground was getting close. In the cockpit, Riley narrowed her eyes at the runway lights. "Gear locked. Flaps 30. Flaps 30 confirmed." Amanda called out, "Speed 16 nom." Riley exhaled slowly. "Time to land." The aircraft glided in, nose pointed slightly right to counter the wind shear, wings level against the ever-present pull of imperfect air. Riley's hands were firm on the controls. Her posture was still. She didn't blink. Amanda stared at the instruments. Pitch 2.9, steady, steady. "Good," Riley said. "Touchdown in 3. The plane skimmed the tarmac. 2. Subtle flare, correcting for the uneven trim. A crosswind correction. Bumble. The wheels kissed the runway with a soft screech, the kind that pilots dream about and passengers barely notice. Riley brought the nose down gently, then reached for the reverse thrust. The engines roared back. "Brakes applied," Amanda said, voice tight. "Manual control," Riley confirmed. "Hold centerline." The aircraft decelerated. The runway streaked by. When the plane came to a full stop just short of the designated emergency holding point, Riley pulled her hand off the yoke. Silence. Even the engines idled quietly, subdued. Amanda looked at her. Riley finally exhaled. "That'll do." Outside, lights flashed. Emergency crews approached slowly. In the galley, Sarah peeked through the curtain, eyes wide, blinking back the tears she hadn't realized were forming. Riley unbuckled her belt. Her movements were slower now, precise but weary, the kind of weariness that only comes after holding everything inside for far too long. Amanda reached for her hand. Riley paused. "You saved them," Amanda said. "I flew a plane," Riley replied. "You helped." "Still," Amanda whispered. "You saved us." Riley stood, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to feel the weight of what that meant. The wheels had touched down, the roar of the engines softened into a hum, the runway lights shrinking in the mirrors of the rear-view cockpit windows. But Riley Ferguson didn't relax, not yet. The landing was only half the job. Planes didn't just stop because you wanted them to. Systems had to be shut down, communication channels cleared, people had to be moved. She glanced at the inert figure of Captain Ellison, reclined now, still breathing but motionless. A medic would be on him in seconds, but not before they taxied off the runway. Protocol wouldn't allow it. "Let's move her off the active strip," Riley said, reaching forward again. "Tower, this is Flight 739, requesting permission to taxi clear of 28 left. Captain still unconscious. Medical needed on arrival." A crisp reply came back almost immediately. "Flight 739, roger. Proceed to taxiway Juliet. Emergency response will intercept at holding point J7. Amanda copied the coordinates, already keying the flight path into the taxi panel. Her movements were quick, efficient now. She wasn't second-guessing anymore. She was co-pilot again. And Riley had given her that, not just by taking control, but by trusting her with it. And how far was it? As the plane turned slowly off the runway, the cabin remained quiet, the hum of low whispers muted by the gravity of what had just happened. People were still in that suspended state, not panic, not relief, something between awe and uncertainty. They didn't know if it was over, and they didn't know who to thank. In 18B, the businessman leaned slightly into the aisle. "She flew it," he muttered, voice low and half disbelieving. "That woman, 18A. Across the aisle, a young mother clutched her toddler a little tighter and nodded slowly. She just stood up, like it was nothing. "He looked like she'd done it before," someone whispered from a few rows ahead. She didn't even flinch. The murmurs grew like quiet rainfall. Inside the cockpit, Riley guided the aircraft onto the designated taxiway, her eyes scanning every movement. The hands that had once gripped military-grade flight controls now adjusted a civilian panel with equal ease, though the tension in her shoulders didn't fade. Amanda glanced at her. "You okay?" Riley nodded. "Just finishing the job." As they approached the holding point, red and white lights flared in the windshield. A team of medics jogged up the taxi lane. Behind them, 2 emergency response vehicles flanked a low-profile ambulance, its back doors already open. A ground marshal waved his glowing wands, signaling a complete stop. Brakes engaged. Riley sat back and finally pulled her hands off the yoke. "Now it's over," she said. Amanda stood quickly and pulled the latch for the cockpit door. "I'll help with the handoff." Riley didn't move. She looked at Captain Ellison again, this time longer, her eyes scanning his pale face. "I hope he's not a stubborn one," she murmured. "I've known pilots who'd rather die than let someone else land their bird." Amanda gave a soft laugh, despite herself. "If he is, he picked the wrong day." Sarah was already outside the cockpit when Amanda opened the door. The lead flight attendant's face was flushed, but not from panic, from something closer to pride, maybe even awe. "Emergency crews here," she said quickly. "I've told passengers we're holding. Everyone's staying calm." Amanda nodded. "We'll need a few minutes before we deplane. Medics first." Sarah's gaze shifted past her to Riley, still seated in the left-hand chair, quiet, upright, eyes forward. "She did it?" Sarah asked softly. Amanda looked back at Riley. "Yeah, she did it." Sarah nodded once and stepped aside as medics came rushing in. 2 paramedics with crisp uniforms and clipped voices moved directly to Ellison's side, assessing, checking vitals, running a portable monitor over his chest. Riley stood at last, giving them room. "Ma'am," one medic said, giving her a respectful glance. "You the one who flew her down?" Riley simply nodded. "Hell of a job," the other muttered while checking Ellison's pupil response. Riley stepped out of the cockpit as they worked, emerging into the front galley like a soldier returning from deployment, not looking for applause, just needing air. The curtain pulled back to reveal a sea of faces. All eyes were on her. She didn't speak, didn't wave, just stood there for a moment, hands at her sides. Then Sarah broke the silence. Is the reason we're here. The applause didn't start instantly. It rippled. First one, then two, then a scattered chorus of clapping that grew into something thunderous. Passengers stood. People cried. Some didn't clap at all. They just stared, unsure how to react to a woman who had walked into a cockpit like it was her birthright and returned with their lives intact. Riley didn't smile. Not fully. Just a small, restrained nod. She appreciated the sentiment, but this wasn't a moment of victory, it was a moment of relief. Lisa pushed forward, face red and hands trembling as she held out a water bottle. Here, she said. You need something? Riley took it, more to calm the girl than to satisfy her own thirst. Thanks. Mark came up behind her, arms crossed, mouth open like he wanted to say something meaningful, but couldn't find the words. You ever flown commercial before? He asked instead. Riley raised an eyebrow. Not in a while. Well, you're better than half the captains I've met. Riley gave the smallest smile. It's a low bar, isn't it? Fair, he admitted, chuckling softly. Sarah stepped in. We're cleared to begin deplaning after the medics finish. Captain Ellison's stable. They're transporting him to St. Anne's. Good, Riley said. You want to speak to the passengers? Riley shook her head. Let them go home with a good story. That's enough. Too humble, Sarah muttered. Riley's eyes wandered the cabin. Rows of ordinary people who had boarded a flight expecting nothing more than peanuts and a nap. Now every one of them would walk off, remembering the stranger in 18A who didn't hesitate. As the medics wheeled Ellison out on a stretcher, Amanda followed closely, giving updates to the lead EMT. Riley stayed behind. She didn't follow them. She didn't need to. Her part was done. Passengers began to exit, many pausing as they passed her. Some simply nodded. Others whispered thank yous, eyes glistening. A few clasped her hand briefly. No fanfare, just human contact, gratitude in its most honest form. Riley accepted each gesture with grace, but inside she felt a distance growing again, the very same distance she had carried since she left the service. A life saved didn't erase the lives lost. A successful landing didn't quiet the voice inside her that always whispered, "You walked away." But today, maybe, she had walked back. The last of the passengers exited. The crew lingered behind. You should go first, Sarah said. I'll finish the post-checks. Riley hesitated. Mark nodded toward the exit. Go on. They're waiting for you. Riley turned. Down the jet bridge, a small crowd had gathered, not of press, not of paparazzi, but ground crew, paramedics, a few gate agents, all watching, all silent. As she stepped out of the plane, the setting sun broke over the horizon and lit the tarmac in gold. Riley blinked, eyes adjusting, boots hitting solid ground. She didn't know what would come next, but she had flown again. And the sky hadn't swallowed her. By the time Riley reached the terminal, her name had already become legend. The buzz had started the moment the emergency landing was confirmed. Whispers over headsets, murmurs through open cockpit doors, baggage crews texting loved ones on break. The phrase was repeated again and again. The passenger landed it. Not the co-pilot, not the flight crew, a passenger. And not just any passenger. A woman from row 18, silent the whole flight, who walked forward and did the unthinkable. She walked alone now, past the waiting area where passengers gathered in small clusters, reunited with family or standing stunned by the magnitude of what had almost gone wrong. They looked toward her. Some nodded. A few stepped forward, but stopped short, unsure if she wanted thanks or distance. Riley offered a respectful nod to each. Behind her, Sarah, Amanda, Mark, and Lisa followed at a slower pace. The crew moved like a unit now, connected not just by routine, but by the kind of shared moment that sears people together in ways nothing else can. There was no small talk between them. Not yet. Everyone was still processing. An airport administrator in a gray blazer intercepted them near the security exit, tablet in hand and concern etched across her face. "Captain Ferguson?" Riley gave a quiet nod. "Just Ferguson." "Understood," the woman said, hesitating. "I've been instructed to escort you to a private area. The FAA will need to debrief you. Emergency services would also like a word, and we've had inquiries from a few outside parties." Riley exhaled slowly. "Media?" The woman nodded. "And military liaison." Of course, Riley thought. It was never just the landing. There were always echoes. A life like hers never stayed buried when the surface cracked. Amanda stepped beside her. "I can come with you if you want." Riley shook her head. "I've had enough co-pilots today." Amanda gave a half smile, but her eyes lingered a second longer before she stepped back. Riley followed the administrator down a corridor meant for crew and staff. Behind them, the buzz in the terminal faded into the sterile silence of service halls and fluorescent lights. Her boots echoed on the linoleum, a rhythm that felt familiar, like walking across the hangar deck again, the scent of aviation fuel in the air. The administrator led her into a small private conference room where 2 chairs, a pitcher of water and a folder sat waiting. A uniformed paramedic stood by the door. "She's good," he said, tapping the folder. "Vitals came back clean, no signs of trauma or stress response. I've never seen anything like it." "Yes." "She's not like most," the administrator replied, then turned to Riley. "Please, take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." When the door closed, Riley didn't sit. She stood at the window instead, looking out over the tarmac. The sun had fully set now, and the runway lights flickered like constellations. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel proud. Just clear. Like a fog had finally lifted inside her, leaving only the truth that she could no longer pretend she didn't miss the sky. There was a knock. The door opened, and a man stepped in wearing a blue suit, a VA pin on his lapel. He looked 50-ish, neatly groomed, the kind of expression that was polite by design. "Ms. Ferguson," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Matthew Kinley, Liaison Officer for Veteran Emergency Response Protocol. May I—" She took the hand briefly. "You may." He sat, folding his hands neatly. "First, I want to say thank you, not just as a liaison, but as someone who's been in uniform. You did what many trained pilots would hesitate to do under that kind of pressure. The FAA has already confirmed that your actions prevented what could have been a catastrophic incident." Riley didn't blink. "I didn't do it for a medal." "I didn't assume you did," Kinley replied, then softened his tone. "But the question on everyone's mind, and it's coming from people higher up than you or I, why were you on that plane in seat 18A instead of the cockpit of a commercial airliner?" Riley turned away from the window at last. "Because I didn't think I belonged there anymore." He studied her for a moment. "PTSD?" "Yes." "Discharge? Honorable with flying restrictions post-deployment?" "I didn't fight it." "Kahainut." Riley crossed her arms. "Because back then, I was more afraid of what I'd do in the air than what I'd lose on the ground." Kinley nodded slowly. "But today, you weren't afraid." "No," she said, simply. He opened the folder, flipped through a page, then looked back at her. "I've been authorized to inform you that the FAA is opening a formal review. Depending on the outcome, and if you consent to medical clearance, there's potential for license reinstatement under provisional terms." Riley raised an eyebrow. "You're offering me a path back?" Their acknowledging one appeared today. "You didn't freeze. You didn't panic. You executed one of the most difficult procedures in aviation under complete emergency conditions. You didn't just function, you excelled. Riley sat down finally, the chair creaking under her as she folded her hands on the table. And what happens if I say no? Kinley leaned back. Then we shake hands, say thank you again, and let you walk out that door as a civilian with no obligations. You won't be hounded. We've already directed the media to respect your privacy under post-crisis protection laws. She stared at him. The offer was real. The weight of it sank in like gravity reasserting itself after free fall. But so was the freedom to say no. For once it was hers to choose. Riley didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned back to the window. Across the airfield, she saw a small figure standing near a yellow safety line, waving up at the terminal. A child, maybe 8 years old, the same one from the flight. The mother stood behind him, smiling. The boy waved again, wide-eyed and hopeful. Kinley rose quietly. "Whatever you decide," he said, "you've already served again today, whether you meant to or not." He left without waiting for a response. Riley stayed seated for a long moment, watching. Then quietly she whispered to herself, "Maybe I never stopped." And for the first time in years, she let herself believe it. 3 days had passed since Flight 739 touched down in Brookridge. The story had spread faster than turbulence over open plains. Local headlines led with "Veteran Saves Flight," while national outlets softened it to "Passenger Pilot Steps In During Emergency Landing." Riley Ferguson ignored them all. She stayed in Brookridge for the mandatory debriefings. Most were procedural. She answered questions, signed statements, verified flight data. They probed her experience, mental state, intentions. Each time her answers were steady, clear, and unapologetic. When she wasn't needed in a room, she spent her time walking. No destinations, no distractions, just one foot in front of the other, as if reacquainting herself with the ground after so many years pretending she didn't miss the sky. At first, she kept her head low. She declined interview requests, ignored emails from old commanders, and turned down 2 podcast offers from veteran-focused media. But she couldn't stop the looks. People recognizing her in the terminal, strangers nodding with that mix of admiration and curiosity, like they knew they shouldn't bother her, but couldn't help wanting to say something. Even the flight crew had tried to reach out. Sarah had left a voicemail, dry humor in her voice even as she offered thanks. Amanda texted once, just one sentence, "I've never flown better than when you were next to me." Riley didn't reply, but she hadn't deleted the message either. By the 4th morning, she stood again at Brookridge Airport. This time by choice. A return ticket in her hand, a soft breeze pushing through the automatic doors behind her. She had no duffel, no carry-on. Just her jacket and the same dog tags under her collar. Gate B4 was already boarding. "Final call for Flight 422 to Clarkston," the agent announced. "All remaining passengers, please proceed to the gate." Riley waited until the line thinned. She didn't rush. She didn't need to anymore. As she approached the counter, the agent looked up and blinked. Recognition passed over his face, but to his credit, he said nothing about it. "Boarding pass?" he asked. She handed it over. He scanned it, then smiled faintly. "Welcome back, Captain Ferguson." She nodded once. "Just Ferguson?" "Right," he said softly, handing it back. The walk to the plane felt different this time. Not heavier, not lighter, just earned, like she had made peace with something unspoken. The air on the jet bridge smelled of coolant and steel and burnt coffee, same as always, but now it smelled like purpose, too. She stepped inside the aircraft. The flight attendants greeted her with warm voices, unaware or just kind enough not to show it if they knew. She took her seat. Window again, row 12 this time. No one sat beside her. She exhaled. The seatbelt clicked. Somewhere forward in the cabin, the cockpit door opened briefly. She saw a flash of the pilot's uniform as he stepped out to retrieve a checklist from the flight attendant. And then, surprisingly, he turned and looked down the aisle. Right at her. "Captain Ferguson?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough to reach her without feeling intrusive. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes." He smiled. "We read the report. Damn fine work." A few heads turned at that, passengers catching pieces of the exchange, but no one said anything. Not yet. Riley gave him a nod back. "Appreciated." "Glad to have you aboard," he said, and with that returned to the cockpit. The door closed. The plane began to hum with pre-flight energy. Luggage being loaded, doors sealed, the familiar chime of systems engaging. Riley leaned back against the headrest. Her fingers rested lightly on the armrest, tapping in rhythm to some silent beat only she could hear. Not nerves. Not restlessness. Something else. A presence. At 32,000 feet, as the cabin darkened and clouds drifted past the windows, Riley opened the tray table. She pulled from her jacket pocket a folded sheet of paper. The FAA had hand-delivered it 2 days ago. The top read, "Conditional Certificate of Airworthiness, Reinstatement under Review." It meant doors were open again, if she wanted them. She stared at the signature line, blank, still, her choice. When the flight landed in Clarkston, Riley waited for the cabin to clear. She didn't mind letting others go first. She'd learned a long time ago that being first rarely meant much. It was how you walked off the plane that mattered. At the terminal, a man waited just past security. Tall, gray hair, blazer over jeans. His arms folded, not impatient but controlled. A quiet confidence. When he saw her, he smiled. "Riley." She paused. "Colonel Everett." "You didn't have to come," she said. "Didn't want to miss it," he replied. She gave a small nod, lips pressed together. "They really send you, or did you volunteer?" He smiled. "A little of both." They stood in silence for a few seconds. "You're not here to pull me back in, are you?" she asked. "No," he said. "I'm here to say, if you want to come back, there's room." Riley looked at him. "Flight instructor?" she asked, almost teasing. "Whatever you want," he said. "Hell, I've got a squadron of young pilots who'd kill to hear what you did in that cockpit." "I didn't do anything they couldn't." He raised an eyebrow. "No, you did something they haven't learned how to do yet. You decided." She let that sink in. He didn't press her. Just waited. Riley glanced around. The terminal bustled with families and briefcases, fast food wrappers and crying kids. Normal life. Safe. Predictable. She could walk out those doors, head to a quiet house, live a quiet life. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the folded FAA letter and handed it to him. "No guarantees," she said. He accepted it. "Don't need 'em." As they turned and walked side by side down the terminal corridor, neither of them spoke for a while. No need. The choice had been made. Not by orders. Not by circumstance. By her. At the end of the corridor, a little boy in a puffy blue jacket stood staring at the arrivals board. Riley paused as she passed him. He looked up. "Are you the lady who landed the plane?" She smiled softly. "I was." He grinned wide. "My dad says you're a hero." Riley crouched so they were eye level. "Tell your dad I was just doing what needed to be done." The boy nodded, then added, "I want to fly someday too." Riley gave him a gentle nod. "Then maybe one day I'll be watching you bring one home." And for the first time since walking away from the military, Riley Ferguson smiled with her whole face. No weight behind it, no pain, just out of frame. Just peace. She stood and walked forward. Home wasn't behind her anymore. It was somewhere ahead, waiting, wide open like a runway ready for wheels.